Okay, so recent medical and anthro data show that prohibitions on the use of certain foods serve important social, economics, and medical functions in ancient cultures. All right, so these recent medical and anthro data show us that prohibitions on the use of certain foods have an important purpose for social, economic, and medical functions in ancient cultures. But these data cannot explain the origin of the prohibitions involved, since those who originally adopted and enforced them did not have access to the same data as modern researchers. That's stupid. So right away, I go back to finding our conclusion because I know that this is really important. We're saying that this data cannot explain the origin of the prohibitions involved. So what is that really saying? It's saying like we can't tell where these prohibitions came from, right?
Mhm.
And we're saying that because those who originally adopted and enforced them do not have access to the same data as modern researchers. What does this have to do with anything? Oh, I guess we're saying the data can't explain the origin because those who originally had them did not have the same access to the same data as modern researchers. So I'm really struggling to even connect this. Like, what is this person even assuming? I'm like,
It didn't make any sense to me, honestly, because obviously those people in ancient cultures aren't gonna have access to
right.
research.
And I'm like,
Like, it didn't make any sense.
so essentially, they are assuming that if we do not have access to the same information, we can't know what started it. Doesn't make sense to me, but that is what they are assuming, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm going to go through these and I go through always through the eyes of the conclusion and I go through, I'm going to start with E. It's obviously is the answer. And I ask myself, is this needed? I don't really negate it, but this is where I go with, when in doubt, go mild.
Mhm.
So E, the people who originally adopted and enforced food prohibitions in ancient cultures generally had a non-technical understanding of the medical functions of those prohibitions. Is this needed for our conclusion to be true? No, they could have all the technical understanding in the world, but they didn't have access to the same data. So their computer and our computers didn't connect. So that can't be our answer. D, the original purpose of food prohibition is often forgotten a few generations after the prohibition is introduced. Once again, what if it's not often forgotten? What if it's remembered for 7 generations? Does that destroy our conclusion? Nope. C, the social importance of the origin of a food prohibition is independent of the nutritional value of the food prohibited. Like, once again, do they have, what if they have different reasons for why they started? Doesn't matter because they don't have our data. Sorry if I'm like overreacting to this.
You're fine.
Trying to like make it stick. B,
Mhm.
the social, economic, and medical problems of the society may lead to the adoption of contradictory food prohibitions. So one thing I like about this is it's really weak where it says, hey, it may lead to these things. But once again, do we care about contradictory food prohibitions? Nope. Crossing it off. A, the origin of a food prohibition must be explained with reference to the understanding that people who adopted and enforced their prohibition had. Or the origin of a food prohibition. See, this one's hard because it does go strong. And I don't love that unnecessary assumption questions. That makes me like cautious. But so the origin of food must be explained with reference to the understanding of the people who had adopted and enforced the prohibition. So that's saying, like, hey, we can't explain the origin unless the people that are explaining it had reference to have the same understanding the people had. Because what happens if they don't need that? What if it doesn't have to be explained with reference? So this is the one when I get to my right answer, I do negate sometimes. I
Mhm.
especially negate in teaching because I think it's easier to see. But what if we said the origin of a food prohibition does not need to be explained with reference to the understanding of the people who adopted and enforced the prohibition had? That would completely destroy it. Because then it'd be like, well, why do we need this data? So it's poking a hole right into like, where did this come from, literally? It's the needed piece.
I think my biggest problem with this question was that A was such a mouth